Hello, everybody. My name is Gertrude Njeri. Today we have the privilege of having Mr. Mohammed Adow, a senior international correspondent from Al Jazeera, and he'll take us through a masterclass of international journalism. So I hope you enjoy. Please flow in your questions in the chat below, and we'll answer them later in our Q&A session. So welcome, Mr. Mohammed. Thank you for joining us.
No, pleasure is all mine. Thank you.
Okay. So could you tell us about yourself? Who is Mr. Mohammed Adow, and expound on your role at Al Jazeera?
My name is Mohammed Adow. I am from northeastern Kenya, particularly the county of Garissa. That's where I was born, raised, and had my early education. I did not leave Garissa until I was coming to do my journalism training at Kenya Institute of Mass Communication. Upon finishing, went back to my hometown to start working for nation newspapers. Then, they were just a newspaper. Then they did not have the broadcast section. And then a little while later, I joined the BBC World Service, broadcasting in English, Kiswahili, and Somali. Right now, I am a senior correspondent at Al Jazeera, based out of Doha, the capital of Qatar, where the headquarters of Al Jazeera Network is. And I am one of the senior correspondents there who are deployed across the globe whenever any breaking news happens or whenever there are pertinent issues to be covered. So it's a pleasure to be with you today, yes.
Thank you. So what exactly do you do at Al Jazeera? What does the role of a senior international correspondent entail?
I report the news just like I used to before, but this time with a bit of a difference in that we go in somewhere, cover the news, and not just cover the news briefly, but stay there until, there is a conclusion, or just stay with the news until, we are happy that we've done it justice, and then come back and then move on to another assignment. So it's more or less Al Jazeera trying to take its most experienced journalists to go and cover issues that they have experience of covering. So that's what we do. We also supplement the work being done by our bureaus. For example, when we have a big story of a big magnitude and the local correspondent, say in Nairobi or in Johannesburg, is able to cover but not able to cover every facet of the story, then the senior correspondents come in to complement their work and do what else that's needed to be done in terms of coverage.
Okay, that's interesting. I love that it's an extensive portion of covering news in its entirety. That's quite interesting. Yeah. So what can you tell us is your background in the media industry over the years?
I started working as a journalist sometimes in 1997. So a total of 24 years in this path. I started off as a newspaper journalist with Nation, then went on to radio with the BBC World Service, where I stayed for about 9 years, 8.5 years, 9 years with the BBC. There I was also introduced into the world of new media, online. I remember Somali Service website was the first to be updated outside London. We did it in Nairobi, and I was the one who had been trained to do it. So we were updating the website and running the website from Nairobi, and was the first of the World Service. I think there were about 40 or 41 languages then to be done and run from outside London.
Mm.
So that introduced me to the world of new media, and from then on, 2006 went into journalism, TV journalism, and that was, I would say, the peak of my career, because it was the only bit of journalism that I had not done then, TV. And Al Jazeera has this tendency, or way of pushing you into the deep end. So from the moment I went into TV, there was, because it was around the time we were launching, actually on the first day, the first bulletin of Al Jazeera English, I was live from Mogadishu covering the Islamic Courts Union, which was bracing itself for war with Ethiopian forces who are supporting the transitional federal government in Baidoa. So there was a lot to be done. And that gave me the opportunity to quickly acclimatize. And that being pushed into the deep end actually paid off, because at the end of it, with all those stories that needed to be done every single day from Mogadishu, where there was not just the Islamic courts, but also the entire Horn of Africa had become enmeshed in a conflict. And then add on to the international aspect of it, the fight against terrorism by the United States, very live and present in that situation. There was so much to be done. So I didn't even have time to think about what should I do. It was automatically exchanging the microphone, with the camera. So it worked. And from then on, went on to become the East Africa correspondent, then Africa correspondent, until I got transferred to Doha in 2012 as a senior international journalist, correspondent.
Okay, that's interesting. And what can you say inspired you to do journalism from the get-go?
I'll be honest with you, I hated mathematics in school.
Yeah.
And I remember there used to be a career booklet that used to be published by the Kenya Institute of Education, guiding students on what to do.
Yeah.
And I looked for a profession that did not need mathematics.
Yeah.
And so there, suddenly. Well, that was what one bit, that was one bit that I hated mathematics. But I had a passion for journalism as soon as I entered secondary school. Me and a few friends started the Writers Club, and then also the Debating Club. And we started a school magazine in our high school, the first of its kind.
Yeah.
And we used to write there. So I remember at Form 2, students in the school used to call me journalist. So we used to write the magazine actually from the time we were in Form 1 until we were in Form 4. And for me, of course, I hated mathematics too. So journalism was the passion of my life. I really was interested in it. And when I told the story of how I used to write the magazine and all that, I remember the Kenya Institute of Mass Communication used to take 18 students from across the country every year to go into their journalism course. And the examiners, the interviewers who came to Garissa to do the interview with the journalists, the people who wanted to train to be journalists, promised to add, and I had already a scrapbook of all the articles I had written for the school magazine. So they said, we will write our personal recommendation that you get admitted, because, we don't know what's going to happen to you if you don't get admitted to the journalism school, because you're so passionate. And luckily, I was one of the 18 that was admitted. in 1995, and that's how I got into journalism. It was raw passion from my secondary days, and I couldn't think of being any other thing, honestly. I don't see myself having gone into medicine or any other profession whatsoever. Journalism was the thing, and journalism was what I had in mind, and journalist is what I became. Yeah.
Okay. And specializing into the international journalism role, in your perspective, what do you think are the qualities that have sold you in the market as an international journalist?
I mean, you've seen how journalists start in the local media, and some of them stay there, and others say, no, this is not enough. We need to go international. And few of them go into the international media, working in international radio, international television. I think it's first and foremost is the passion for the profession, and secondly, it is feeling underutilized. You feel you still have a lot more to offer. To a wider audience, to a bigger network, that you feel that this local media is sometimes too small for you. And that's exactly how I felt. Looking at what made it possible for me, actually, it wasn't far off the date I graduated from the Kenya Institute of Mass Communication that the BBC approached me. At that point, Nation had started publishing its stories online. And the head of the Somali service, who happened to be from Kenya then, was reading the news from Kenya online, and he was seeing the stories that were coming out of northeastern Kenya and also areas along the border with Somalia. And when he visited Nairobi, he gave me a call and said, look, we need to speak with you. I've seen your stories. We need you to be our representative in Northeastern. And I was like, yeah, but I've never broadcast in Somali. And he was like, don't worry. We will allow you in the first few months to start writing to us in English, and we will translate. So he was very accommodating, very accommodating. And that's how I started. So the first 3 months I was writing in English, they were translating. And then, I felt confident enough to broadcast in my mother tongue.
Yeah.
That alone wasn't enough, because I had studied English and Kiswahili in school and not Somali. So for me, I was being underutilized, broadcasting just in my mother tongue and not the other languages that I was using in the daily life in Kenya. So slowly, I got introduced to the Kiswahili service, and then the African English dailies. And very soon, the World Service proper was calling me for interviews like News Hour and World Today. So that was it. Multilingualism, bilingualism was fashionable then at the BBC. So quite soon, I was transferred to Nairobi. And that's how the languages also helped. Really
helped, yeah. I love that you've used the aspect of standing out with being bilingual, and also the aspect of pushing forward towards your goal. And so I'd want to ask you, what's your perception of this generation and the fact that they want instant gratification in their profession, and especially you being a professional over 24 years, it's taken quite some time. So what advice would you give to young aspiring journalists about holding on until they reach to their goal, and also what helped you stay on this track? I can't hear you. I'm sorry. Mr. Mohammed, we can't hear you. I can't hear you. Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can.
Yeah, I was saying,
Mm.
I mean, the qualities of any good journalist, whether in local media or international media, are the same. You need to be somebody who is dedicated to their work, who is persistence, who has persistence with a purpose. You know your focus, you know where you're headed, you know what you want. And then you persist in that, in attaining that goal. That's so a passion, persistence, and then all the other qualities of a good journalist. Truthful, fair, objective. These things don't change. Whether you're working for Citizen Television here, or you're working for CNN, or you're working for Al Jazeera, or even Fox, what changes usually is the style of the media house you're working for and their policies. But the qualities of a good journalist never change. And sometimes even under pressure from, the people who are paying your salary, you can still adhere to the most basic etiquettes of journalism. You can still be truthful. You should strive to be truthful. And so what I'll say to any journalist who's coming up now is remain a slave to the truth. In this world of fake news, you cannot afford to be sloppy and not check and recheck your facts. People might tell you something, but that might not be the truth. In any event that is happening, there's always rumors surrounding it. There's always misinformation. So try to sort out the sense from the nonsense. Check and recheck your facts. You cannot allow yourself to be lazy at any given time because you are on air. Millions of people out there are depending on you for untainted information. So the responsibility on you is not to say anything you hear, not to broadcast anything you see. Unless you're seeing it yourself, anything you are told has to be fact-checked. So thoroughness in doing what you do, making sure that you are saying only what is confirmed, making sure that you are not disseminating and spreading fake news, and now more than ever before. So the basic etiquette of journalists, the basic characters and characteristics of a good journalist always stand, whether you are in the North Pole or the South Pole. Truth, fairness, objectivity.
You've talked about remaining strong in your ethics, and you have experienced different media houses from Nation Media Group to BBC and Al Jazeera. So what can you say are the difference in cultures among your walks through these media houses, and what advice can you give to students and journalists when they are adapting to different media houses and adapting to their culture?
Yes. It's an important question. I would say there isn't much of a difference between the BBC and Al Jazeera. Honestly, both media houses, stress the need for checking facts and rechecking facts, and also there's very little, I would say, editorial interference. At the BBC, maybe we used to hear, oh, this is the intended result, or this is the message we want to pass. But at Al Jazeera, I'd say 14 years of working with Al Jazeera, I have never ever been told this is what you need to do, or this is the person you need to interview, or so I choose what to do, who to interview the stories for, and how to do them.
Okay.
I choose the angle. So I'll say I have so much more independence at Al Jazeera than ever before, but the BBC was not any different. You know, I also had the leeway to do most of what I did. The Nation also at that point was, you know, on the newspaper, and I would say strived as much as possible to be as independent as they could under the circumstances. So I have been very lucky, I would say, to be working for vibrant media that are very independent, and I'm thankful for that. But there are people who've not had that opportunity, who've got so much editorial interference and so much, you know, dictation from not just governments, but also the media owners. And people usually forget how much interference media owners can give to journalists performing their work, and thereby spoiling, you know, the ability of the journalists to do their stories in the most independent way, because the agenda is not being set by them, but by somebody who has got vested interests. And then also the whole issue of commercial interference. I had very little experience with that, because at Al Jazeera we don't put a premium on advertising and things like that, and so was the BBC. So I would say I've been a very lucky journalist when it comes to independence and choosing what to do and how to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've worked in a couple of volatile and hostile conditions. And what can you say, how can you say that has shaped you on a personal and professional level as a journalist?
I mean, working in hostile environments is challenging, you know, even in the most in most places. You first of all, you're not just paying attention to the story that you're doing. You're also paying attention to your surroundings.
Yeah.
You are thinking not only of the security of your own security, but you're also thinking about the security of the team that is with you. And in hostile environments, the team gets to be larger, you know. You have your security advisors, you have got your driver, and then maybe even an extra driver. Yeah. You have more people than you would have on a normal deployment. So it's very interesting how you don't just think about your own safety, you also think about the safety of the entire team. And, you know, logistically, it is difficult, because you have to carry all the gear, you know, the flak jackets and the helmets and all that stuff. So it is, from the onset, very difficult, because you have to set up all those logistical issues and all that. And I've covered conflicts, you know, not just in Africa, you know, in the case of Somalia, Sudan, and Nigeria, Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ivory Coast, when Gbagbo and Alassane Ouattara were engaged in that fighting after the disputed elections. Niger, you know, Burkina Faso, and all these other places. It takes not just guts, but also lots of planning into it to be able to survive. It's not just what you do on the trip, but also what you did beforehand in terms of preparation, making sure you have all the bits and bobs that you need. But again, once you get doing it, and you start getting all the experiences and the different ways of doing it. I would say one could get addicted to the adrenaline that you derive from a hostile environment, because there's a story here, people suffering. You know, it is instantaneous. You're covering the story, and it's, in a way, it's easier to do it because all the pieces that you need for your story are right there in front of you or not far away from you, and where you cannot reach or where you're not covered. Nowadays, there is, you know, mobile footage from social media journalists all over the place that can fill in the void of what you've been unable to cover. And then the agencies covering all these other parts, its turnaround is much more easier than, for example, covering a feature where you have to travel 300 kilometers this side for an element, and then you have to travel another 150 kilometers on the other side to get the other element. It becomes some sort of a self-contained story because everything is happening within your vicinity. But what people forget usually is that conflict reporting can have its toll on journalists. I mean, it's not as easy as, you know, just ABC. You're doing a story. Stories you're hearing from the people who've been devastated by war, the sights you see, dead bodies all over the place, entire villages destroyed right in front of your eyes. That can have an impact on your life because not only can it create trauma, but it also alters the way you think and view life. And many other times when I've come back from a trip where I have interviewed people who've lost probably, you know, some of their family members or sometimes all of the family members, and the stories they tell you remain with you, and for days, sometimes weeks, you cannot think of anything else other than that sight you saw, other than, you know, those stories you hear, you had, and it remains with you, and that's why some media houses think ahead and think of therapy for journalists, or therapy is always available if they need it. For those who don't have it, it can affect your mental, you know, mental health. I would say it can affect the way you think. It can even alter your character, the way you view stuff. You can become cynical because you have seen so much suffering. So that is also an issue that needs to be paid attention to. You know, the well-being of journalists who've covered conflicts. And sometimes, you know, you flip at the if you don't get therapy and all that, you could see yourself having anger management issues and all that. So yes, it is one aspect of journalism that really has to be paid a lot of attention, because we still have to report. We have a responsibility to report on conflict, but it's also one that affects the lives of journalists. You know, there's the famous story of this journalist, for example. It wasn't conflict, but it was a drought and famine in South Sudan. The guy who took that famous picture of the vulture waiting for that baby to die, he ended up killing himself. So these things affect you mentally also, is what I wanted to say, using that as an example.
The magnitude of the social responsibility journalists have is normally ignored, and I think that's such an amazing way to look at it. And I'd want to understand, despite all this, why did you choose the aspect of social justice and change and development in relation to multimedia platforms in your journalism career? Why social change and development?
Maybe because of my background. You know, I come from one of the most underdeveloped parts of Kenya. My first years in school
I'm sorry, you're frozen.
Yeah,
Can
I
you
was
repeat?
saying, maybe because of, where I come from and my background, because I schooled under a tree for the first 3 years of my schooling, until our parents came and built a classroom for us. That's how I started and I come from one of the most underdeveloped parts of Kenya. So for me, social justice and development is really something that's very close to my mind, and I would say, yeah, that's basically probably why. And I love telling the stories of people, and there can be no story without people.
Yeah.
Every story any story that affects the lives of people is a story. That's how we look at it. So that has been across the board. This has been something that I have pursued, and every time I do it, I feel like I've done something. So
yeah,
that's probably why.
On a lighter note, could you tell us a monumental part of your career where you did something and up to date it still stuck with you as a really great experience?
Indeed. I would say launching Al Jazeera English television in 2006 and being part of the launch team that took part and produced the first news hour of that television. That actually stands out as one of the most momentous periods of my journalism. It's not an easy thing to set up a 24-hour news channel, but it's one thing to be the person chosen to appear, or the people chosen to appear in the first news hour of the existence of that channel. And covering it from Mogadishu, which at that time was peaceful under the Islamic Courts Union, also gives it an added impetus, because Mogadishu has always been known to be lawless. But for that period, 6 months under the Islamic Courts Union, it was peaceful at that moment.
Yeah.
And reporting from it at that point, which was the calm before the storm, also, for once, I was reporting something positive from a city that had been considered the most dangerous in the world, or one of the most dangerous. So that itself also showed, what Al Jazeera was bringing to town, which was positivity when it comes to covering Africa, And I remember the headline then was Mogadishu, until recently one of the most dangerous cities in the world, is now peaceful. But for how long,
Yeah.
So it was not only launching a TV station that was a truly global television station, but also it was reporting a positive thing from one part of Africa, which had not known positivity for a long time. So I would say that was. But I have also had other momentous occasions, covering the inauguration of Trump from Moscow, where he had a great following. Is one thing. Boko Haram, the war against Boko Haram in Nigeria, northern Nigeria, was another. Going with the regional troops, from Chad, Cameroon, Benin, Niger, and Nigeria, and traversing the entire Lake Chad region was another momentous point in my career, I would say. Was going on an embed with Al-Shabaab fighters for 3 weeks and knowing the very fabric of their DNA and what they are made of, and reporting was also, I'll say, something that was different, and I would say contributed to the knowledge of those who are interested in the affairs of the Horn of Africa when it comes to really understanding Al-Shabaab and what they are all about. Because those 3 weeks I was with them helped in unveiling the group, their real intentions, what they were all about, and their modus operandi.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Wow. You also covered the South Sudan split from the north portion of Sudan, and you are able to score an exclusive interview with the president of Sudan. And how can you say that experience was for you? And considering that Al Jazeera was a premier channel then, how was that also monumental for Al Jazeera and for yourself as a journalist?
It was very important because there was a lot at that time. 90% of the referendum for South Sudan was happening in the south. There was very little happening in Khartoum and in other parts of. And I remember when I was assigned to be in Khartoum before I got the interview, I was sort of begrudgingly saying, why am I not in the theater where, the action is? Why am I not covering the real events that are happening in the south? 90% of the referendum areas are in the south of Sudan. Why am I not there? Why am I not covering it? And when we got the interview of al-Bashir, which actually accounted for the view of the north, it was really interesting, and it was a good get. It was really momentous in that we were getting the opinion. And I remember the first question I started asking him was, how much personal responsibility are you willing to take for the impending split of Sudan? And from then on, we just started. And then he one of the things that he said that still stays with me up to now was, yes, we know they're going to separate. Yes, they're going to separate. They're going to vote for a split. But it's not going to be a smooth riding for them. They will not be able to agree. They will fight. There is a possibility of a war. And he is saying this even before the referendum has happened. And that still, is vivid in my mind because that's what happened, Exactly what al-Bashir was prophesizing happened. And I can only hope peace and prosperity for the people of South Sudan. They have suffered a lot. They've had a very long war. And with good leadership, they can be able to navigate. And good leadership is what I am underlining here, because that's what most parts of Africa need. With good leadership, South Sudan can become one of the most bustling economies in Africa. And I can only hope, the best for them. But they've been through a lot in the past few years.
What can you say has made you stand out as an international correspondent and journalist?
I don't think it's anything I myself have done. It's also, the supporting systems and networks that I have had, my colleagues, TV, I always say, is teamwork. Radio journalists can run around with their microphones. You can record anything you want. You come back again. You're the one who's downloading it on the computer. You're the one who's editing it again, and then you send. If you're writing a script, it's you. But TV is different. You cannot function without a camera person. You cannot. You need a producer at most of the times, and it's teamwork. And I always say half of the things we do is getting along with people, getting along with the team that you're working with, or getting along with the people you're going to interview, or getting along with the villagers you have to do a story on, because sometimes people can be hostile. if you don't have the right approach. So TV is a lot about teamwork and people skills and people orientation. I would say I have had a lot of help, not only from my colleagues, but also from government officials, who have to give you access to places, from the people I've interviewed. And honestly, I have always been treated with kindness. So I will attribute what made me stand out more to the support systems and the people I've met and the people I've interviewed, rather than to my own personal, abilities.
Oh, that's nice. That's really lovely. Okay. So as an international journalist, you have been seen as an advocate of multi-platform journalism, and you have wound up staying on television. So why television, and why did you deviate from print and radio?
To be honest with you, the first, first thing first is it pays better. That's why I'm there. Attraction was it pays better. That was the first attraction. Honestly, when you compare the different platforms, and I've had the opportunity to do radio, online, newspaper, and also TV, I would say TV is much more powerful in that, there's the commentary the journalist is making, plus the video and the footage. So it's audio and visual. But there's very little space for the journalist, because it's the pictures that tell the story.
Yeah.
If you don't have the picture, you can't say that. You can't say anything that you're not seeing on the screen. Yeah. You're a slave to the picture. If you don't have the picture, you don't have that part that you wanted to say in your mind. It's not like radio, where you can think about anything and everything, and with description and good writing, you can bring that vision, that sound, that smell, that taste to life. You don't have that independence on TV. And in the beginning, I used to feel really curtailed, because there's something I want to say that will take the story forward, that will be very important to the story. But I can't say it because this is TV. So that was a handicap.
Yeah.
And writing scripts for TV in the beginning for me was like, why do I have to limit myself? Why do I have to write in these very short sentences? Why can't I be descriptive? Yes, you cannot be descriptive because you don't have the pictures of what you want to say.
Yeah.
That was the constant answer. I've acclimatized, and over the years, accepted the reality that, hey, it's not you, it's not what you have in mind, it's not your thoughts, it is the picture.
Yeah.
It's the pictures. First, it's what can you obtain? If you can obtain this amount of pictures, this is what you write.
Yeah.
You don't write about anything and everything. You can't.
Yeah.
That, was limiting in the beginning. But again, I would say, compare the impact a radio piece would have, the impact a television piece would have. It's much more powerful. It's a really powerful tool. And multi-platform journalism is the way forward. And I would say the future is of video journalists who go out there and get the story, for online, of course, online pieces, and then take the sound and everything from there for, a radio story, if radio continues to still be in, because the rate in which some things are becoming obsolete are just so much. Nowadays, radio is mostly listened to in the car, when people are going to work or, all that. So multi-platform journalism is and will continue being the norm. So the future is one journalist, doing everything on their own. As it becomes much more easier to film things and, the gadgets become smaller, you would see more and more, this crew that we used to talk about in journalism during this time and those before us becoming much fewer. And probably one or two people big enough to do an entire documentary, just shooting by themselves. And it's been done before, remember that journalist who filmed an entire documentary with an iPhone. I think that is going to be the future. That is where we are headed.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. And I think something I've noticed about ADMI is the multidisciplinary aspect. Like as a journalist, I've been able to cover all aspects of journalism and be a producer by myself. And I love that. And could you give us an instant of your production and your career where you saw how efficient it is to be armed with different aspects of journalism and different aspects of producing content?
You mean in producing for multi-platforms?
Yeah, for multi-platforms, and also being able to record video with a camera and also touch a bit on sound, writing the script and editing, like having different skills in the production of news and stories.
Yeah. We don't have that actually on Al Jazeera because different people have different work.
Yeah.
And doing some of the work of, we rarely have the opportunity to step into, you can do stuff with your mobile, but it's rare that you can take the camera from your colleague and start filming yourself.
Yeah, definitely.
But at the BBC, I remember we had the opportunity to go and do stuff for different parts of, mainly because there was an emphasis on journalists becoming more used by all parts of the BBC. And when I worked as the World Service correspondent in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, I remember I was alone. I will do any recording that needs to be done.
Yeah.
And then I will set up the satellite phone, for the studio. I'll be the one calling in, to the different studio where I was filing the story. On top of that, I would be the one sourcing the pictures I need for television.
Yeah.
Either from the agencies, and then also writing the script and then recording it myself. So it was a one-man show throughout, and that really helped. But with Al Jazeera, probably because of the resources we have, we are more confined to actually what we were recruited for. And it's very rare that we cross over, which is a good thing because then you pay more attention to exactly what you're supposed to do. And it means you've got the right support system. But at the BBC, what you're talking about was the norm, and that's what we did. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think it's also applicable for upcoming journalists where they don't have the opportunity to have that support system. And finally, before I send you over to the Q&A session with Elizabeth, what advice can you give to these aspiring international journalists? Your final word.
Indeed. Journalism is a great profession, but it comes with responsibilities.
Yeah.
It's not easy to say, I'm a journalist, and then stop at that. The responsibility on you as a journalist is, are you telling the story the right way?
Yeah.
Are you being truthful? Are you being objective? It all comes back to that, the basic etiquette of a good journalist. Off air and on air, a journalist must aspire to maintain those characteristics. And you cannot succeed, because you can build a reputation as a journalist over many years, but it might take 1 or 2 seconds to bring all that down by just saying one lie on air can finish you. Let's say you have got 19 years experience, but one fake story that you say on
Mr.
air.
Mohammed, we cannot hear you there.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello?
Hi, can you hear me?
Hello?
Hi, can you hear me?
Hello, Mr. Mohammed?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah. Hello?
Hi, can you hear me? Hi.
Yes, we can.
Mr. Mohammed, we can hear you. You can keep going.
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
I'm sorry, I broke off the internet.
Okay.
So as you can just continue what you're saying as Gertrude sorts out her internet issue.
Okay. What I was saying is, you have to be, I mean, you have a responsibility to ensure that there is continuity in what you do. In that you have to be truthful all the time. Otherwise, all those years of experience and reputation can be undone in just a few seconds or a few minutes. So on air and off air, a journalist must always adhere to the basic etiquette of journalism. And then right now, with all the fake news that you see going around, the advent of new media and social media, where everybody and anyone can post to be a journalist, post what they want, distribute and disseminate any piece of information that they want. The onus on us journalists is even more, because we have to ensure that we become the point of reference, because people are getting information every second, every minute on social media. Now they must have a place where they can return to and say, is this really true? Has this reputable media house reported this? Is this just something somebody has written and put out there, or is it on mainstream media? So the onus on the mainstream media is right now to become, I mean, we are not obsolete. We're not, like social media has only enhanced the way we distribute news. It's made it faster. We don't need to, for example, launch a satellite dish to be able to disseminate news anymore. Social media is another mode of distribution for whatever we are producing as news. But the onus on us is to ensure that we do our job the right way, so that people who are doubtful of all this information and misinformation online can have a point of reference where they can return to and see, whether whatever they've seen is the truth or not.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much for joining us and telling us about yourself. I'm sure there's some people who have questions, so Elizabeth will take you over that. Thank you, Mr. Mohammed.
Thank you.
So I'm here to take us through the question and answer. But before I start, I was really smiling when you were talking about a place of reference, because in our house, like with my family, we always watch news, and we'll watch all channels. We'll watch local channels like KTN, Citizen, then we'll watch our international channels. And for us in our house, my dad goes to 2 channels to see, okay, this local channels are saying this, but let's check if this is true. So one of the two channels are Al Jazeera and BBC, surprisingly, where you've worked before. And we know, okay, if BBC said this, they probably fact-checked this, so we can probably believe it. So it was funny to me because we have this conversation in the house about if it's on BBC, then it's likely true. If it's on Al Jazeera, it likely doesn't have a slant. So I've really enjoyed listening to you. Everything you're saying, I'm like, yes, that's true about Al Jazeera. Yes. Especially something you said about how in Al Jazeera you report freely. Like you've never been told this is who we want you to interview or this is the type of story we want. We really feel that on this end. So I'd really like to applaud you for that work because it's much appreciated. So we have quite a few questions here. And I feel like you already answered some of them in your conversation, but I'll just highlight them. Someone asked, how do you manage the stress of tight deadlines?
Yeah, it's every journalist's nightmare. Yes, deadlines. But then at a certain point, you get used to it, and the adrenaline that it generates. Like when I go on 2 weeks, 3 weeks off, leave. Sometimes I feel, oh my God, I'm not doing anything. I need to go back. I need to work. So it's addictive as well. You dread it in the beginning, and then it becomes addictive. Yes, the thing is, the deadline is a bit different from, for example, local channels that come on air at a certain point and you cannot fail. As opposed to 24-hour news. In 24-hour news cycle, you have a bit more flexibility because the news is needed on every hour. What you have is, I think you agree with the news desk on a time that is sensible. You look at your surroundings, you look at the security situation, you study everything and come up with and agree on a deadline that is sensible in terms of delivering the story. If the news hour is 2-3 hours away and you've just arrived at the airport and the news editor is asking for a package, which is a complete story, then it's impossible. So it's up to you and your producer to say, no, we cannot produce it. We're just passing through customs. We're going home to the hotel first, and then we have to deploy. So 3 hours from now is impossible. Give us 5 hours from now. That is the advantage we have over, local channels, for example. But then there is stuff you can do as soon as you arrive that can keep the beast fed. We call it feeding the beast. As soon as you arrive in a place, you see what's happening. You've gotten a flavor of, the surrounding, and you've gotten an idea of what's actually happening, and you've interviewed 1 or 2 people. Stand up and do a walk and talk. Explain it. 1 minute, 1.5 minutes, you've got a walk and talk. You're explaining your surroundings. This is where it happened. This is where the bomb took off. The number of people, body parts here, the wreckage of cars. You give a descriptive look of the scene and then send that. That will keep the beast fed for a few hours while you now work on your substantive story. Or you could just do a rant down the line, what is called Ask Live, or other organizations call it Look Live. You just do one hit where you're explaining everything, and that's it. It will keep the feed, the beast fed, and then you can continue news gathering for your substantive package. So there are ways you can work and deliver more stuff rather than just news gathering until the end. There are snippets of the story that you could give that could make the news team on the news desk happy while you do other stuff. So these are the ways you do. And if you had already given a walk and talk or a look live or an ask live, as we call it, and then you do not, you bypass the deadline and you do not deliver the story, and then still it's okay, because the story has already been told in a certain way, and the story has been on for already, the last 3-4 hours. So they can still wait for another hour. So this is how we do it. This is how we do it.
That's so interesting, because what you're saying is, as a journalist, there's the story that maybe the media house is expecting from you, but there's also different sides that you can present in the meantime to, as you said, feed the beast. And I'd never thought of that. And it's such a good idea to just involve your audience even more by showing them your surroundings or giving them someone else's story. So how to manage the stress of tight deadlines, I feel like you've answered that extremely well. So there's another question here that has been repeated but in different ways. And I'll ask it from Namwene Mukabi, I think. He says, hi, he or she says, "Hi Adow, I have watched your stories, quite interesting pieces of journalism. How do you navigate through those war-torn places as a journalist?" This question goes hand in hand with, what is the biggest risk you've ever taken in your journalism career? Have you ever felt like your life is in danger, and so on?
Yeah. Yes, navigating security, hostile environments. Yes, it's difficult, challenging, but I would say doable. All you have to do is never ever neglect personal instinct when in a hostile environment. If you see the hairs at the back of your head rising, or you feel a chill go down your spine, or you see an argument between even members of one force getting heated, that's the time to run. You just bolt and run. So sometimes it's the natural instincts, sometimes it is the advice from the local journalist. Make sure, even when you don't understand the language, you keep on asking your translator to translate to you every little thing that's being said, because something might be said and he might think it's all right, but for you, it could send your antennas up and then, raise those natural instincts to tell you that there is danger. But usually it is doing the homework beforehand. How easy is it to get into this place? What do I need? Have I got everything I need to go in here? How far can I go that is safe? A whole area might not be a hostile environment, but then there is a spot where, for example, let's say you are going into an area that's, the government is fighting rebels, and it's okay to go into the area that the government controls, but then getting out of the government area puts you in uncharted territory and rebel territory where you can be killed, kidnapped, anything can happen to you. So you need to know where to go and where not to go. And most of the times we have got security advisors with us, people who've done military service and all that, and they can tell when things are getting bad. So you have to rely on the advice from the team. And you have to be a team player. more than ever before, because you are not just you're part of a team. And the overall safety of the team is what is needed at that point. It's not half of the team getting hurt and then the other half. That doesn't count. The entire team has to be safe. You have to play a role.
I can't hear you. I think your microphone is muted.
Can you hear me now?
Or is muffled rather.
Can you hear me now?
Slightly, it's just a bit low.
I don't know what to do.
Yes, it's getting better.
So what I'm saying is,
yeah,
the safety of the team is vital, and you have to play your part. Now, in terms of places where I have felt threatened as a journalist in a hostile environment, or the most dangerous situation I have been is when in 2000, the year 2000, when I traveled from Baidoa in southwest Somalia, heading to Mogadishu. Baidoa was being controlled by a rebel group known as RRA, an armed group, I'd say, because there was no state to rebel against at that time. So the Rahawain Resistance Army, RRA, was in control of Baidoa. And down the road to Mogadishu, there was another armed group. And both sides had mined the road, put landmines in the middle of the road for 15 kilometers each. So they used to open the road. They used to remove those landmines every Friday for traffic to pass. So throughout the week, traffic coming from Mogadishu will have to line by the road and wait for Friday. And the same with those coming from Baidoa. So I happened to come on a Monday from Baidoa, and I found the road closed and all this traffic on the road. And then we started looking for the guys who had laid down the landmines. We paid them to take us through the road, but they said, we're not going to remove the mines. We're only going to direct you to where it is so that you can avoid it as you drive. And you can't get off the road as well, because getting off the road, there are landmines as well. So every time we came to the spot where the landmine was planted, they will tell the driver, you have to go like this. And then we have to go around it. And about 10, 15 meters again, we have to do another bend, either turn left or right to avoid it. Sometimes it will be smack in the middle of the road.
What?
Like avoid for 15 kilometers in the car, no one talking to each other. We are sweating. And the guy who planted the mines is sitting next to the driver. And we are slowly, being led, around these mines. And once we were through that part of RRA, we went to the other side, the USC side. And they had a different way of doing it. The car that had taken us from Baidoa was going back. It couldn't go into the other territory because that's enemy territory. We had to get a fresh car ordered from Mogadishu. And the guys from the other side were in the car, and also another car that was following it. And the way they had done it was different from the other guys who just brought us to the end of their territory. They had removed all the landmines. Whenever they came to a landmine in the road, they would remove it. And bits and pops of the landmines were in the back of the car I was supposed to travel with. So we bade the other guys goodbye, entered into the car full of, disassembled, unassembled landmines. And every time we passed the spot where they removed the landmine from, they will put it back. Someone will crawl on his chest plant everything and put every pin back to where it belongs. And we went. So halfway through the road towards Mogadishu, these guys were showing us body parts hanging from the road, from the trees, you know. They told us, yeah, the other day, this vehicle tried to say, you know, there are no landmines on the road, and against our advice, tried to drive. He said, those body parts are from the people who were traveling in that car. So it was so real. And the funny thing was, as soon as we were across the mine area, I slept. And I did not wake up until I arrived in Mogadishu, about 100 kilometers away, and the road full of potholes. I don't even remember how we passed it. I would say it was the most peaceful sleep in my life.
Wow.
Even with the potholes.
Even with the potholes. I think that's what you were saying about the thrill. It's gotten to a place where your passion is driving you, that the thrill of the unknown is also fueling you and somehow strangely giving you peace in such volatile situations. And that's so inspiring. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So another question we have that, yes, I've just seen a question here and it's in relation to that. It says, when you move to a new country, how long does it take for you to connect with sources, especially when there is a language barrier?
I mean, yeah, when you're covering news, it's spontaneous. Sometimes we're forced to do stories as soon as you arrive in the airport, as in the case of TV. As I told you, it's 24-hour news. So there's a demand session. You show that you have presence there in terms of having a journalist there. So sometimes we arrive and we're told, oh, let's establish presence. That's how they call it. And we are here. And sometimes we go out and do the stories. But the language barriers, the best way of navigating around it is using local journalists as translators, or just hiring translators, you know. The best thing is to have a journalist because they know what you need. And they can direct you and, you know, they would know how to ask the question and all that. But sometimes you can't get a journalist, so you get a translator. And that's how it works. Many times when we've been to places where we totally cannot understand any of the languages, three of us, the cameraman, the producer, and me, we cannot understand anything. We do not know the local language. So we have to hire a local who speaks good English and who understands his way. And that's how we always navigate through the language barrier. Yeah.
All right. So someone here says, Alex Kipchumba says, you are a part of excellence. Al Jazeera, when I see Al Jazeera, I see excellence. A unique excellence in many kind of ways. I am studying to be a graphic designer, and I would credit this TV in getting me to fall in love with graphics and stories. So give a secret or something. How is such excellence achieved? So I guess what his question is you've reached such a standard of high excellence with such a great work ethic, and the stories you tell are truly brilliant, life-changing, and very important. And I guess his question is, what's something you'd say, a secret maybe, that got you where you are?
Yeah, the search for perfection. I mean, perfection is not easy, but you always have to seek it. So I would say never settling for what you have, always going the extra mile, being, persistent, never taking no for an answer, never being satisfied with what you have. Somebody might say, yeah, I've got an interview here, an interview here, and an interview here. They are enough for a story, let me go with it. But chances are, if he said, okay, let me walk these 5 kilometers up the hill, he would find the most amazing footage that would really lift his story. But he settled for what he had. Well, he would have found, let's say in the case of a cholera outbreak, you've gotten a village at the foot of the hill, but if you went up the hill, you hello?
Hello. I can
Sorry
hear
about that. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah. So I'm saying it's not settling for what you have, but always going the extra mile. I would say that.
Yes.
And making use of the resources that you have. It's very vital to use the resources at your disposal to the fullest. If you have a local journalist and you're not talking to him, and he's with you throughout the journey, then it's a waste of time. You need to get as much information as possible. Talk to the people that you're interviewing, talk to the villagers, talk to the local journalists, get as much information as possible.
Yeah,
hello?
Hello, I can hear you. Thank you. I really like that answer. For excellence, so Alex Kipchumba, how is excellence achieved? Never stop at anything. Keep going and seek the help and advice of the reporters around you, the people around you. I think that's a very full-bodied description. Use what you have. You have everything you need at this present moment. Another question here, which has been said, which has kind of been repeated again twice, I'll ask both of them. The first one is, what were some of the challenges as a reporter in the beginning? And the next one is, here it is. How did you get to international platforms as a journalist? I mean, kindly take us through the journey. So I know not everyone was here from the beginning of this chat that we've been having, but maybe if you can just give them a brief idea of how it was for you starting out as a journalist.
Yeah, I mean, when you're a journalist, you belong to a team, but none of that team is with you in the field. It can be a bit of a disconnect. So I would say I didn't know the expectations. I mean, I knew how to do a story, particularly for the BBC in the early days. Is a team, you don't know them. You've only heard their voices over the telephone or over the radio, and they are asking you to do a story on this and this subject. It's a bit unnerving. And again, in the beginning, when you're fresh, you hear part of the story, but part of the conversation, the other part, you are owed by the fact that Robin White or this person that you used to hear on the radio roasting presidents is actually talking to you. You're owed you're starstruck, and you're more thinking about the voice you're hearing than even what they are saying. So much gets lost, in translation as you hear the person speaking to you, because these are the stars that you've been hearing, and they're talking to you. And you only get part of the conversation. So by the time the conversation is over, you're like, what did he actually want? How did he ask me to do the story? You know the subject. So that at the beginning was a problem for me. And also, during that time I was starting journalism, the internet wasn't as fast as it is today. It was dial up and all that. Sometimes it will break. So sending a file, an audio file, several megabytes, was huge. And sometimes I'll stay up for hours, just waiting for the file to go. And sometimes it will break down, as that sent maybe half, and then you have to start all over again. It was a problem. But again, later on we got the satellite phones, and they helped a great deal in sending audio files. Other than that, access. Authorities trying to hide information, not giving you access, or if you manage to get access yourself and do the story, you get ramifications. Getting called in by the local district commissioner or the police boss, having a lecture for about 30 minutes on why they think you are a renegade journalist and somebody who's working against the government and all that. I mean, running into trouble with the authorities was another big issue. But other than that, it's been fairly smooth. Yeah.
Okay. That's very interesting. So now that we have a few minutes left in our masterclass, I'd like to ask you just, I think, 3 more questions, and then maybe the answers can be more brief so that we can reach more people.
Exactly. Sure.
So someone asks, what are some of the best stories you have done?
And every story I've done is good. About best.
Yeah.
Could be better. Yeah, I would say it's hard to say. It's hard to choose because I've done thousands of stories over the years. But stories that I'm proud to have done, I would say stories, any story that was giving advocacy to people in trouble, showing the world the suffering of our people who either had been tormented by their own state or were facing problems that were naturally occurring, like, earthquakes and floods and disasters, and just pointing out that there is a community here that needs help. I'm proud of those stories, really proud of those stories. But also the documentary about my life, Not Yet Kenyan, which I did in 2013, which addresses my upbringing in northern Kenya and what it means to be a Kenyan Somali. I would say that is also one story I'm proud of.
Yeah, such wonderful stories, especially giving a voice to the voiceless. I think that's extremely amazing. Mm-hmm. Another question, could you kindly describe 3 qualities of your writing style?
I mean, it hasn't been easy to get to where I am. And it hasn't always been this good. But at its current state, I'll say sharp, short, and sharp, short, and informative.
That's awesome. Thank you. So another question, how do you remain relevant in this industry where it is so how do you remain relevant in this industry where it's so easy to become stale?
Yes, that's a very good question. You need to be always ahead of the pack. You have to follow changes in the media scene. You have to adapt, constantly adapt. Constantly adapting might mean learning to use a new software, learning to use a new application that is being used, or sometimes even going in or going back to university to do a whole new subject, learn something else. In 2011, I decided to go back. Well, I had a master's already. I ended up going back and did a story on, I went to do a degree, a master's degree on communication, media, and public relations at Leicester University in the UK. That gave me a wealth of knowledge that I could actually, again, put back into use in my actual work. And the trends and everything, new media and all that were addressed in that course. And that I had to do so much research on it also gave me some sort of a flair and a good understanding. So you constantly have to look into ways of making yourself much more knowledgeable and much more, how can I put it? You continue sharpening your skills, as I would say. It is a never-ending curve. It's a learning curve. You never stop learning. If you stop learning, you become rusty. You fall on the roadside. But in this journey, you cannot avoid, constantly gaining the skills because it's changing at a speed. I mean, technology and the world and how we do journalism is changing at a speed, that some of us cannot keep up with. But for those who want to continue being relevant, you need to constantly sharpen your skills, read wide, because if you stop reading again, you stop being a journalist. You don't have knowledge. So constantly reinvent yourself because, things are moving fast. That's how I would say.
So the last question I think I'll take from Rose Ohingo. She is working in the PR industry. And this is the question she has. Is there any chance we can link on social media or any channels you have? So maybe you can share with people where they can find more of your stories and more of what you have to say.
YouTube. Just write Mohammed Adow, Al Jazeera. You'll find all my work there. Documentaries as well as news stories.
Thank you so much. I have enjoyed every minute of this 1.5 hours. I've learned so much from your journey and your work ethic, and I'm so grateful that you are able to spend this time with us. I'm sure everyone has learned something, and we're now ready to attempt to become international journalists.
I wish you the best of luck, Liz, you and your colleagues.
Thank you.
Wish you the best of luck. It's been a pleasure.
So thank you everyone for joining us today. This was a masterclass with Mohammed Adow, a journalist from Al Jazeera. And I hope you've learned something. I hope you've been challenged. And let's keep this conversation going. You can find him at Mohammed Adow on YouTube. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.